Good morrow, ladies and gentlemen, and allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Wardle, and I'd like to indulge you about a tale about a close and personal friend of mine, namely Mr. Pickwick of London, who I invited to spend Christmas with me, along with several friends of his, a few years ago. It was after a particularly hearty lunch, where I will be the first to admit that rather too much in the way of beer and cherry brandy was consumed, that I put forward the suggestion that as it was a lovely, sunny, if rather cold afternoon, we all spent some time on the ice provided by a lake in the grounds of my house that had frozen over. Mr. Allen shouted, "Capital idea!" and was joined in the appreciation by Mr. Sawyer's "prime," as well as a "skating is so graceful," and commentaries of "elegant" and "swan-like" from some of our lady friends. The only person who seemed a little unsure about the whole thing was Mr. Winkle, who hummed and hawed about the idea, but eventually agreed and stated that he was a little out of practice. Next came the issue of skates, a pair I always carry about my person in the winter, but again Mr. Winkle seemed a little ill-equipped. Not a problem, announced Mr. Trundle, and within 10 minutes we were all arrived in the lake in question. Whilst Mr. Weller and myself swept the snow off the lake that had fallen the previous evening, everyone else was busy putting his or her skates on. Some were a little more successful than others. Mr. Winkle, for instance, had managed to put his on back to front, but with a little assistance from Mr. Snodgrass, he was ready to join us. My own personal opinion was that Mr. Sawyer, who was prescribing figure of eights all over the lake, was just showing off for the ladies, but the sight of Sam, Mr. Winkle's manservant, having a terrible time getting Mr. Winkle to his feet, caught my attention. "Now then, sir," said Sam in an encouraging tone, "off with you and show 'em how to do it." "Stop, Sam, stop!" said Mr. Winkle, trembling violently, and clutching hold of Sam's arms with the grasp of a drowning man. "How slippery it is, Sam," he said. "Not an uncommon thing upon ice, sir," he replied, which prompted me to giggle slightly. But that was interrupted by Sam shouting, "Hold up, sir!" as Mr. Winkle made an instant of a frantic desire to throw his feet into the air and dash the back of his head on his ice. I assume accidentally, because no one would be so silly enough to do that on purpose. Would they? These are very awkward states, aren't they, Sam?" inquired Mr. Winkle, staggering. "Could it be," I suggested, sliding over to them, "that there was an awkward gentleman in them?" and laughing slid over to Mr. Pickwick, who slightly scowled at me. Mr. Winkle eventually managed to recover, just as Sam said, "Now, sir, start off." "Stop an instant, Sam," gasped Mr. Winkle, clinging most affectionately to him. "Just hold me at first, Sam, will you?" he asked. "There, that's right, I'll soon get the hurry of it, Sam. Not too fast, Sam, not too fast." I smiled at Mr. Pickwick, and with a completely innocent face, called, "Sam, could you come here a moment? I'd like to ask your opinion on something." "Let go, Sam, sir," said Sam. "Can you hear the governor calling? Let go, sir." With a violent effort, Sam disengaged himself from the grasp of the agonized Mr. Winkle, and in doing so administered a considerable impetus to the unhappy Mr. Winkle. With an accuracy which no degree of dexterity or practice could have ensured, that unfortunate gentleman bore swiftly down the centre of the lake, at the very moment when Mr. Sawyer was performing a flourish of unparalleled beauty. Mr. Winkle struck wildly against him, and with a loud crash they both fell heavily down onto the ice, causing myself and everyone else on the shore to burst out laughing. Mr. Sawyer had risen to his feet, but Mr. Winkle was far too wise to do anything of the sort. He seated on the ice, making spasmodic efforts to smile, but anguish was depicted on every lineament of his countenance. Mr. Pickwick was both incited and indignant. He beckoned to Sam and said in a stern voice, "Take his skates off." "No, but really I don't need to get you started," remonstrated Mr. Winkle. "Take his skates off," repeated Mr. Pickwick firmly. The command was not to be resisted. Mr. Winkle allowed Sam to obey it in silence. "Lift him up," said Mr. Pickwick, as Sam assisted him to rise. Mr. Pickwick retired a few paces from the bystanders, and beckoning his friend to approach, fixed a searching look upon him, and uttered, in a low but distinct and emphatic tone, these remarkable words: "You are a humbug, sir." "Oh, what?" said Mr. Winkle, starting. "A humbug, sir. I will speak plainer if you wish it. An impostor, sir." And with these words Mr. Pickwick turned slowly on his heel and rejoined his friends. After several minutes of watching the demonstrations on the ice, wondering, although I do not wish to brag myself, a demonstration of what I believe is termed a double salcho by yours truly, Mr. Pickwick observed, "It looks like a 9-water exercise, that does, doesn't it?" "Indeed it is," I said, as I slid towards him and jumped onto land, and asked if he slid himself. I used to on the gutters when I was a boy, he replied. Well, in that case, I said, replying to take my skates off and hand them to him, it's high time you had another go. A sentiment echoed by all the ladies in attendance. I should be very happy to afford you any amusement, he replied, but I haven't done such a thing these 30 years. Oh, pooh, nonsense, I said, and insisted most firmly that he had a go. Mr. Pickwick paused, considered, pulled off his gloves and put them in his hat, took 2 or 3 short runs, balked himself as often, and at last took another run and went rather slowly and gravely down the slide, with his feet about 1.25 yards apart amidst the gratified shouts of all the spectators. It was certainly the most intensely interesting thing to watch, to observe the manner in which he performed his share in the ceremony, to watch the torture of anxiety with which he viewed the whole experience. Gaining upon him was a person behind, at the imminent hazard of tripping up, to see him gradually expend the painful force that he put at first, and turn slowly around, with his face towards the point where he had started, to contemplate the painful smile which mantled on his face when he accomplished the distance, and the eagerness with which he turned round when he had done so, and run after his predecessor, his black gaiters tripping pleasantly through the snow, his eyes beaming cheerfulness and gladness through his spectacles. However, the sport was at its height, the sliding at its quickest, the laughter at its loudest, when a sharp, smart crack could be heard. There was a mass rush back towards the bank, a wild scream from the ladies, a shout from Mr. Tupman, and a large mass of ice disappeared, the water bubbling up over it, with Mr. Pickwick's hat, his gloves, and handkerchief floating on the surface, all that anyone could see of him. Mr. Pickwick, I shouted, and turned towards the assembled companies, all with looks of extreme concern on their faces. I need a ladder, I said, and quick. Mr. Tupman, by way of rendering the promptest assistance, and at the same time conveying to anyone who might hear it the clearest and possible notion of the catastrophe, ran off across the fields with his utmost speed, shouting, "Ladder! Ladder!" and arrived back a few moments later with one. As I placed it gently upon the lake, there was a cheer as a head, face, and then shoulders emerged from beneath the waters, and disclosed the features and spectacles of Mr. Pickwick himself. "Mr. Pickwick," I said as I crawled on the ladder, "keep yourself up, if only for an instant." "Yes, certainly," he replied, wringing the water from his head and face, and gasping for breath. "I fell upon the back, and I couldn't get on my feet at first." The clay so much upon his coat was clear, visible, evident testament to this. And as for the fears of the spectators were rather relieved, when I suddenly remembered the water was nowhere more than 5 foot deep. I got to Mr. Pickwick, and not wishing to cause any more damage to the ice, hauled him upon the ladder, and we both reversed course, until Mr. Pickwick was at length fairly extricated from his unpleasant position, and once more stood on dry land. "Oh, he'll catch his death of cold," said Emily. "Dear old thing," said Arabella, "let me wrap this shawl around you." "That's the best thing you can do," I said, and handing another back to Mr. Tupman. "And when you've got it on, run home as fast as your legs can carry you, and jump into bed directly." No sooner had I said that than a dozen shawls were offered on the instant. 3 or 4 of the thickest having been selected, Mr. Pickwick wrapped up, and started off under the guidance of Mr. Weller, presenting the singular phenomenon of an elderly gentleman, dripping wet and without a hat, with his arms bound down to his sides, skimming over the ground without any clearly defined purpose, at the rate of 6 good English miles an hour. Mr. Pickwick paused not an instant until he was snug in bed. Mr. Weller lighted a blazing fire in his room and took up his dinner. A bowl of punch was curried up afterwards, and a great carouse was held in his honour. As for myself, well, let's put it this way. I was the partner for every lady who wanted to have a dance that evening. Well, I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the tale of Mr. Pickwick and the ice, and pray that you continue to enjoy the rest of this evening. Good day to you.